I'm just gonna give you guys a little bit more of an update on the progress of this project. I know it's been a few days since I was able to post, but I finally found some time to get all the stuff together that I've done so far, and yeah, show it to you guys a little bit today and kind of explain how I did some of this stuff. So this is the case for the truck here. This is all ATP5 and 6061 aluminum that I used for the posts here. ATP5 for the base and the top. So this stuff here, what I did for the base was I machined a groove in the bottom all the way around and then machined the profile out for these posts here to match that profile. So those things sit right in there. There's one screw going through the middle of each of these from the bottom, and then another one coming from the top. So this track right here, I milled that. I gave that about 5/1000ths of an inch clearance around the plexiglass so that when you screw the top and the bottom together with those posts in there, all of those pieces have a track around them on four sides, so nothing's going to move that thing once you have it all fastened together. And then you don't have to worry about having fasteners on the outside of the glass or stuff like that. It just looks a lot cleaner that way. So for the engraving, I put the Kenworth badge on both of the corners. I actually had some engraving for this piece that went in the middle here, but I'm going to redo that one because I didn't really like the engraving in the glass because I want you to be able to see the features of the model. That seemed a little bit more important, so I'll probably just do the engraving on a separate piece of aluminum or something and mount that to the case. So this stuff was actually all engraved from the inside. So the groove is in there, so on the outside you don't feel any groove, it's all smooth. So this piece right here, I milled all the plexiglass to fit the profile of the little step that's down in here, and then that's all screwed in. These are, I believe, these are M4s, and then these ones for the posts are M5 screws. So I milled some little feet on the outside of that. I actually put one in the middle for a little bit more support. It's probably not going to need it because I think it's really overkill for the weight that this thing's going to be, but you know, it's definitely not going to be a light model, that's for sure. So moving on here, this is the trailer, what I've got done on it so far. Like I showed you guys in the first video of the CAD, I milled these sides here. This was all surface milled, 3D surface milling with a ball end mill to make those grooves for the stainless steel siding. I milled all of the lights in there. If you look real close, you can see there is a very small radius on each of these things, and the reason I did that was so that I could do this in two setups. I could just lay this thing, clamp it down flat in a vise, do all the milling from one side, and then flip it over, deck it off, and then finish the profile. So this is the front piece of the trailer right here. It's not fastened right now, it's just sitting there for video purposes. So that's going to get screwed from the inside, and I'll show you guys the brackets in a second for that. So down here, I milled these little bosses and then put a hole through there, and those are basically going to be to hold, you know, the glad hands for the air hoses, which is really just going to be a couple of these extension springs here. I'm messing around trying to find a couple sizes that I think will work. It's probably going to be the 1/8 inch. So then those things are just going to sit right in between there, and then you stick a little piece of 14 gauge wire through that hole, and that's going to hold them. And I'm going to do the same thing down in the deck. I'm going to put something in the deck plate and mill that in there so that you can do the same thing down there to fasten those. So here's the 99 Thermo King. I believe it's a SB3. I think that's the model name. I'll have to double check that. This is the reefer here. So those holes, those are all drilled in there, and then I surface milled these bevels on here, and then all the radii around the outside. And then the engraving and stuff I did with a little ball end mill for the doors, and then for that chrome, That's around here when I had this thing standing up in the vise, milling that profile like this. I just went in there with a little thread mill and did that engraving there. So this is just going to get screwed from the inside of that plate, and that's going to be mounted up there like that. I'll probably remove some more of this material just to lighten it up, because this thing is, you know, feels like a brick right now. So yeah, I want to reduce the weight where I can, because this thing is going to be pretty heavy when it's done. So inside, you can see I kind of took some of the material out of these panels just for weight reduction, just to kind of take some of that extra stuff there we don't need. And then I made 4 of these brackets here. So it's the same part for all 4 of them. I just added 2 holes, counterbores to these on the inside. Actually, no, 3 I added to the ends down here, sorry. So that you could flip them sideways and then use them to hold the sides of the trailer together and the top down, but you could also hold the tops of these front and back panels in place too. So that's gonna just keep everything real square, and yeah, nothing's gonna move that. And then the bottom of the trailer, there's gonna be little counterbores for M3 screws there all along this thing. That's gonna hold that bottom of the trailer to that. So here, these are the parts. Well, actually, this one right here, this was the one I was making in actually a video that I'm going to be coming out with after this one here. I'll show you guys the machining for these ones right here. Pretty simple little part. I actually had to remake them because there was a little bit more of a gap here than I wanted there to be. So what this is going to do is this right here, this is going to be the mounting straps holding up those reefer tanks. And I've seen a couple of show trucks where they have sheet metal around those brackets that they mount underneath the trailer there. So I just decided to kind of go for that look, and it was easier to mill because it's square and you don't have to worry about how to get a screw in those brackets. It's just going to look a lot cleaner on the outside. But those things are going to mount from the inside of the bottom plate. You're going to screw those down from the top of the bottom plate, and then you're going to screw that bottom plate in there. So those are just going to sit back here in the middle of the trailer. There's going to be one on each side. And then what you do is put the middle of the tank right in between there, and the flat spot of that tank sits almost perfectly with the flat spot there. So then when these things are lined up, there's a press fit hole for those end caps in the tank, and there's a clearance hole in the straps. So what's going to happen is these end caps are going to slide through the clearance hole in the straps, and then when you put these things in a hand press, I'm going to press those down real gently all the way in, so they're never going to come out. And then it's going to make it look like these straps are actually wrapping around the tank, holding it up from underneath. I got a little gas cap in that one there, so that's going to be the back side of the tanks. And then a little M3 threads in there. So that's those parts. This is the light bar that's going to go pop up underneath the cab. So I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. This has been hand polished. These little clearance lights were hand polished, and then I'm just going to paint the tips of those orange or something with an airbrush, or possibly by hand. I'm not sure which way I'm going to do it yet. So that part turned out pretty nice. And then I'm just going to mill, once I do the cab block at the end, I'm actually going to mill the pocket to fit this part, because, you know, it's not perfect. You can never be perfect to the CAD, but you can be pretty close. So I'm just going to mill that pocket to fit that part at the end. So these are the fenders. Those are going to go on the back of the tractor frame for the drive tires. You can kind of see these ones aren't fastened to anything, but that's kind of how those duals are going to look sitting inside there. It's just sitting on top of them right now for the video. So the insides of these rims have all been hand polished. I'm going to airbrush the outside after I rough those up, probably with some Scotch-Brite or, you know, real fine sandpaper and stuff. And those are going to be mounted up underneath the frame. I'm going to have a screw for those, and then that little boss right here that I showed you in the last video of the CAD. I'm going to have a couple of slots milled into the bottom of the frame that'll fit real tight to the shape of that boss there, so that it's going to keep that fender from wobbling back and forth like that. It's going to keep it nice and square with the frame. So here I've got the landing gear. So I've got, this is some 16 gauge wire that I'm going to use for that. I'm going to actually make the little handle for the gear that's going to go into that hole and get bent with a 90-degree bend, come down, and then another 90-degree in another plane. So that's going to hang down there, and then this little hole right there, I'm going to find some wire or something to go in there, and I'm just going to tie that down so that it's going to hold that handle in place. And those are going to get screwed up from above the bottom plate too. So all of these stuff, or all of these parts that are done to hang underneath the trailer, you're going to have to fasten those to the bottom plate from the inside before you screw the bottom plate into the trailer. So here's the steer wheels right here. This was kind of a fun part to do. I milled all of those lug nuts in there. With a little end mill, and then made that hubcap. That's actually a separate part. I couldn't get an end mill small enough to make that radius go all the way up to the lug nuts on the edge there, because I wanted it to be real close to those nuts. So I actually had to mill a little bore in there and then make this a separate part and then press that in by hand very carefully to get that hubcap in there. So these have also been hand polished. I'll probably do a little more polish work on them because they're not quite as shined up as the drive tires. So these are the rest of the tires here I got. This is the inside of the dual, so the axle is going to press into these right here. I've got a couple of ejector pins that I'm going to cut off. They're actually used for like injection molds, stuff like that, for pushing parts out of molds, and they're super hard steel, hardened steel. So I'm going to have to cut those to length and then mill those down, press them in these wheels for the axle. So another thing I'm doing with these parts is I want to make sure that you can pull the axles off if you have to for some reason to either take the truck apart in the future or repaint or do touch-up work and stuff like that. So I don't want the axle to be permanently stuck to the tractor after it's been painted and put together. So as I keep making more parts, I guess you guys are kind of going to see how that goes together and the reason why I did that. So these duals here, this is how this assembly works. That axle is going to press into here in that hole, and then this little boss that was milled in each of these here, that's going to press through this hole once you get the axles on there and we get them painted. So that's going to pop a little bit of the way out of that hole to kind of look like that cap that goes over the duals. So that is pretty much what I've got done so far. I got a couple other parts I'm programming right now. I'm going to get machining again. I will be posting that video shortly for you guys of the machining for those reefer tanks. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with this project. It's coming along great. And I got pretty high hopes for it. So yeah, I will be posting more in the future. Thanks for watching.